A forensic accountant stands up at a charity dinner in front of 120 donors and a full board of directors and calls the man who hired him a fraud. He has the numbers. He has the slides. He says $4.2 million has vanished from the foundation's books, untraceable, and that the famous man smiling at the head table is not a philanthropist at all, but a con artist running a tax shelter dressed up as a good heart. And the famous man does not defend himself. He does not stand. He does not raise his voice. He does not produce a single document. He sits at the head table with his hands folded, and he lets the accusation hang in the air, and he says almost nothing at all. The room cannot understand it. An innocent man would fight. An innocent man would have an answer. So why did Cole Hartley sit in silence while his own accountant tore him apart in front of everyone he'd asked to believe in him? He had a reason. It was the best reason a person can have. And by the time you understand it, you will understand why this is the only one of these stories I've ever cried while writing. Stay with me. The answer is at the very end, and it changes everything that comes before it. There is a foundation in Chicago called the Lantern Fund. You have probably never heard of it, and that is by design. It does not put its name on buildings. It does not hold press conferences. Its annual report is 4 pages long and lists no individual grants, only categories. And for 9 years that quiet little fund had moved a great deal of money to a great many people without anyone ever quite seeing it happen. Once a year, in October, the Lantern Fund held a dinner, not a gala. The word was banned in the bylaws. A dinner. In the second-floor ballroom of the Pemberton Hotel on Michigan Avenue, under chandeliers that had hung there since 1924. 120 people who had given money and meant it sat down at round tables with white cloths and ate a plain good meal and listened to a report on what their money had done that year. The man who'd started the fund sat where he always sat, not at the center of the head table. At the end of it, nearest the kitchen door, in a charcoal suit that fit him but did not announce itself, a suit you'd forget the moment he left the room. He'd worn the same one to this dinner 4 years running. He did not give a speech. He never had. He'd founded the entire thing on a single condition that the board had argued about for a month and finally accepted. His name would appear nowhere, and he would never, ever take the microphone. His name was Cole Hartley, and most of the people in that room knew it. And the kindest thing about the Lantern Fund was that they had all learned to pretend they didn't. This year there was one new face at the head table. A man the board had hired 6 months earlier, after a longtime treasurer retired, to do a full forensic audit of 9 years of books. Standard practice. Due diligence. Clean it up, certify it, move on. His name was Raymond Kessler. And he had not come to certify anything. Raymond Kessler was 57 years old, and he was, by any honest measure, the best forensic accountant in the state of Illinois. He was also one of the loneliest, though he would never have used that word. He wore the same gray suit every working day of the year. He owned 4 identical ones, and he carried a leather satchel that was older than some of his colleagues. And he had a reputation, well earned, for being impossible to charm, impossible to rush, and impossible to fool. People assumed he had always been this hard. They were wrong. Raymond Kessler had been made. He'd grown up over a dry cleaner's on the West Side, the son of a man who pressed other people's shirts for a living and counted his tips into a coffee can every night. Raymond was good with numbers the way some kids are good with a ball. Naturally, effortlessly. And he'd clawed his way through night school and into a junior position at a respectable firm by the time he was 26. He believed, then, the thing his father had taught him. Numbers don't lie. People do. The numbers will always tell you who's lying. if you're willing to look. In 1994, Raymond Kessler was assigned to the books of a developer named Garrett Wynn. Charming man. Beautiful office. A philanthropist, people said. Galas, ribbon cuttings, a wing of a hospital with his name on it. Raymond was 28 and junior, and he saw something in the numbers that did not sit right. A circling of money that came back to where it started, and he raised it. Once, quietly, to a senior partner. And the senior partner put a hand on his shoulder and explained warmly how the world actually worked. Mr. Wynn was a friend of the firm. Mr. Wynn gave to all the right causes. Raymond should certify the books and learn to see the bigger picture. Raymond certified the books. 18 months later, Garrett Wynn's empire collapsed into the largest investment fraud the city had seen in a decade. 1,100 families lost their savings. A retired schoolteacher named Dorothy, who'd put 35 years into a pension she'd handed to Wynn because of that hospital wing, lost all of it. And Raymond Kessler's signature was on the audit that said everything was fine. The firm fed him to the wolves. He lost his license for 3 years. He lost his marriage in the second of those years. And he spent the rest of his life building himself into a man who would never, ever again sign his name to a beautiful lie just because a rich man gave to the right causes. That is what Raymond Kessler carried into the Pemberton Hotel ballroom. Not greed, not malice, a wound 30 years deep that had taught him one lesson and one lesson only: the kinder a rich man looks, the harder you check. And when he looked at 9 years of the Lantern Fund's books and found $4.2 million flowing out to recipients he could not name, to people who'd signed nothing, with no grant agreements and no paper trail, he did not see what was actually there. He saw Garrett Wynn. He saw the hospital wing. He saw Dorothy's empty pension. He saw the bigger picture they'd told him to see, 30 years too late. And he swore he would not look away a second time. So he asked the board for 10 minutes at the dinner. And they gave it to him. He stood up between the salad and the entree, and he asked for the lights, and the slides came up on the screen behind the head table. "My name is Raymond Kessler," he said. "6 months ago, this board hired me to certify 9 years of this foundation's finances. I am not able to do that, and I am not willing to let a room full of generous people go home tonight, believing a story that the numbers do not support." The room went quiet in the way a room goes quiet when it senses a knife. He walked them through it. He was good. He was clear. $4.2 million over 9 years, moving out of the fund to destinations with no documentation, no contracts, no signatures, no audit trail, money that simply left. He put up a chart. He put up another. And then he turned, and he looked down the head table at the man in the charcoal suit, and he said the words that the whole room had felt coming and still flinched at. "This is not a charity. This is a structure. And the man who built it is not a philanthropist. He is a fraud, and he has used the goodwill of every person in this room as cover." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Mr. Hartley, I would very much like to be wrong. So I'll give you the chance, right now, in front of everyone. Tell us where the $4.2 million went." 120 people turned to look at Cole Hartley, and Cole Hartley said nothing. He looked back at Raymond Kessler, steady, not angry, something almost like sorrow on his face, though no one could have said why. His hands stayed folded on the white cloth. The seconds stretched out. 3, 5, 10, the longest silence that ballroom had held since 1924, and still he did not speak. A board member leaned in. Cole, just answer him. Tell him where it went. And Cole Hartley said the only thing he said in that room the entire night. I can't. 2 words. Quiet. And the room heard them the way Raymond Kessler wanted them to. As a confession. A young woman near the back, a junior associate from Kessler's firm named Maya Okafor, 26 years old, the one who'd actually built half those spreadsheets, watched Cole Hartley say I can't, and felt something cold move through her. Because she had seen something in those books that her boss had told her not to chase, and she suddenly, terribly wished she had chased it. The dinner did not recover. People left their entrées. The board chair tried to call for calm and failed. Phones came out. By the time the plates were being cleared, half the room had already decided, and you could feel which way they'd decided, and it was not in Cole Hartley's favor. An innocent man fights. Everyone knows that. The silence was the loudest evidence in the room. Raymond Kessler stood by the screen, vindicated, and felt none of the satisfaction he had expected to feel. He felt, instead, the way he'd felt at 28, like a man who'd finally refused to look away. It was Cole who crossed the room to him, not the other way around. Through the murmur and the scraping chairs, the man in the charcoal suit walked the length of that ballroom and stopped in front of the accountant, who had just destroyed him, and he did not look destroyed. He looked like a man with a hard decision to make. You did good work, Cole said, quietly, just to him. Most people would have stopped at the gap and called it a day. You built the whole chart. That's real. Kessler stared at him. Of all the things he'd expected, a compliment was not one of them. Can I ask you one thing? Cole said. Honestly, not to trap you. A pause. When you traced the 4.2 million, did you follow it all the way to the end? To where it actually landed? Or did you get to the point where the paper stopped and decide you already knew what you'd find? Raymond Kessler opened his mouth to say, of course I followed it. And then he didn't. Because he hadn't. He had traced the money to the edge of the documentation, to the place where it left the fund and disappeared into people with no contracts and no signatures, and at that edge he had stopped. And he had filled in the rest with the only story his 30-year-old wound knew how to tell. He had not followed it to the end. He had followed it to Garrett Wynn. Nothing came out of his mouth. Give me 10 minutes, Cole said. Just you and me. Then you can come back in here and finish me off if you still want to. I won't stop you. There was a small service room off the kitchen, a steel table, a single hanging bulb, the muffled clatter of the ballroom on the other side of the door. Cole Hartley pulled out a metal chair and sat down on it, and gestured for Kessler to take the other, and the 2 men sat in that bare, bright room while 120 people decided things about one of them in the dark beyond the wall. I'm going to tell you where the money went, Cole said, and I'm going to tell you why I couldn't say it out there. And then it's going to be your choice what happens next, not mine. Because once you know, you'll be carrying the same thing I'm carrying. He took out his phone. He found a photograph, and he set it on the steel table and slid it across. A woman, mid-40s, standing next to a boy of maybe 10 in a hospital gown, both of them grinning like the world had just been handed back to them. Her name's Denise, Cole said. Her son needed a procedure her insurance called experimental. $214,000. The fund paid it. There's no grant agreement, because she begged us to keep it quiet. Her ex-husband was looking for any reason to drag her back into court, and a windfall like that would have been a weapon. So she signed nothing. She doesn't even know my name. She thinks an anonymous donor saved her kid, And she's right. And that's exactly how it has to stay. He didn't take the photo back. He let it sit there. There are 61 of those. Over 9 years, a firefighter's widow whose mortgage we covered so the kids could stay in the school district. A man who came out of 18 years in prison, exonerated, with nothing. We set him up quietly, because the second a story like that has a famous name attached, it stops being his life and becomes my publicity. Your $4.2 million didn't vanish, Ray. It went to 61 people who needed it to be invisible. The missing paper trail isn't fraud. It's the promise. It's the whole point. Raymond Kessler looked at the photograph of Denise and her son for a long time. You could have shown me this, he said finally, months ago, in private. You could have stood up out there tonight and shown the whole room. Why didn't you? Why would you let me? Because to prove I'm not a fraud, Cole said, I have to say their names. Out loud. In a room with 120 people and 40 phones. He leaned forward. The second I defend myself, Denise's ex-husband knows where the money came from. The widow's privacy is gone. The exonerated man is a headline again. I had a choice tonight, Ray. I could protect my own name, or I could protect theirs. I can't do both. He shrugged, almost gently. It's not a hard choice. It only looks hard from the outside. And then he asked the question, the real one. Somebody hurt you once, didn't they? A long time ago. A man who looked generous and turned out to be a thief, and you got blamed for not catching it. Cole watched him. How many years have you been checking the books of every kind-looking rich man you meet, trying to make up for the one you missed? Raymond Kessler, 57 years old, the hardest man in Illinois, put his hand over his mouth and closed his eyes. I lost my license, he said, after a while, to the steel table. My wife, a schoolteacher named Dorothy, lost her whole pension and I signed the paper that said she was safe. 30 years. I told myself I'd never sign another beautiful lie. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. And I just stood up in front of 120 people and called the most honest man I've ever audited a fraud. Because he looked too generous to be real. You weren't wrong to look, Cole said quietly. You were wrong about where you stopped. Those are two different mistakes. The first one is the job. The second one is the wound. He stood up. I can't tell you what to do now. I won't. If you walk back out there and say nothing, I stay a fraud, and the 61 people stay safe, and I can live with that. I've been living with worse. He paused at the door. But I think you already know how to follow a number all the way to the end. You just have to be willing to find something good when you get there. Then, he left Raymond Kessler alone in the bright little room with the photograph still on the table. When Raymond Kessler walked back into that ballroom, the lights were up, and the room was half empty, and the board chair was on the phone, with what was almost certainly a lawyer. Kessler did not go to the screen. He went to the microphone at the podium, and he tapped it, and the room slowly turned. My name is Raymond Kessler, he said again. An hour ago I stood here and told you I'd traced $4.2 million and found fraud. His voice was steady, but it cost him something to keep it that way. I was wrong. Not about the math. The math is correct. The money left the fund exactly the way I said it did. I was wrong about what that means, and I was wrong because of something I brought into this room that had nothing to do with this foundation and everything to do with a mistake I made 30 years ago. You could have heard a fork drop. I have now traced those funds to the end. Every dollar. I can tell you, on my license and my name, that this is the cleanest charitable operation I have audited in my career. and that the absence of documentation is not a cover for theft. It is a cost the founder has chosen to pay, personally, to protect the privacy of people who needed protecting more than he needed defending. He looked down the room, to the man at the end of the head table. I owe Mr. Hartley an apology, not because of who he is. Because I let an old wound make me cruel to a man who'd done nothing but good, and I did it in front of all of you, and that is exactly the kind of damage I've spent my whole life trying to prevent. For a moment, nobody moved. Then it was Maya Okafor, the 26-year-old who'd built the spreadsheets, who'd seen the thread and been told not to pull it, who stood up at the back of the room and began to clap. One person. Then the board chair set down the phone. Then a table near the front. It rolled across that old ballroom like light coming up, and Maya was crying and not bothering to hide it, scrubbing at her face and clapping anyway, and the whole room let her. Cole Hartley, at the end of the head table, smiled. The real one, the crooked, unhurried one. He didn't stand. He didn't take the microphone. He never had. And he wasn't going to start now. He just caught Raymond Kessler's eye across the length of the room, and he nodded once. The way you nod at a man who has just done the hardest thing he's ever done. And that was all the credit Cole Hartley took for any of it. Here's the part that matters. The applause was the easy part. The applause is always the easy part. Raymond Kessler did not become a different man overnight, because 30 years of checking every kind face for a knife is not a habit you put down in a service room off a hotel kitchen. But he started. The first thing he did, within a month, was design something for the Lantern Fund that had not existed before. A system that let the giving stay completely invisible to the outside world while remaining fully, rigorously auditable on the inside, so that no future accountant would ever again mistake a promise for a crime. He built it for free. He called it, in the documentation, the Dorothy Protocol, after the school teacher whose pension he'd failed to protect 30 years before, and he never explained the name to anyone at the fund, and they were kind enough not to ask. He joined the board the next year. He became, of all things, the person who fought hardest to keep the giving anonymous, the former bloodhound, now the guardian of the very invisibility he'd once mistaken for fraud. He found Denise, the woman in the photograph, through entirely legitimate channels, and confirmed quietly that her son had made a full recovery, and he never told her or anyone else that he'd ever doubted where the money came from. And Maya Okafor, the young associate who'd seen the thread and been told to leave it alone. Raymond Kessler did something he had never done for anyone. He mentored her. He taught her everything, and the one lesson he taught her first, before any of the technical ones, was the one it had taken him 30 years and a ruined dinner to learn himself. Follow the number all the way to the end, and be brave enough to find something good when you get there. 4 years later, she opened her own forensic practice with one rule painted on the wall. We trace it to the end, every time. Before we ever say a name, Cole Hartley kept funding the Lantern Fund. He kept his name off it. He kept sitting at the end of the head table nearest the kitchen, in the same charcoal suit, never taking the microphone. And the 4.2 million became 6, then 9, and the number of people who got quietly saved without ever learning who saved them kept climbing, and as far as I can tell, it is still climbing today. Years later, a reporter who'd gotten wind of part of the story tracked Kessler down and asked him why a famous man would sit in silence and let himself be called a fraud in front of everyone he knew. And Raymond Kessler, who understood it better than anyone alive, gave the answer that I think is the whole point of this story. Because the only thing he cared about protecting, Kessler said, was the one thing defending himself would have destroyed. He didn't stay silent because he was guilty. He stayed silent because he was the only person in that room willing to be the one who got hurt. So why did Cole Hartley stay silent while his own accountant called him a fraud in front of the entire room? Because answering would have meant saying 61 names out loud. Because somewhere in that room were 40 phones and one woman's dangerous ex-husband, and 1,000 ways for a vulnerable person to become a headline. Because he had built the entire thing on a promise that the help would stay invisible. And the only way to keep that promise was to let himself look like the worst version of a man instead of the best one. He sat in that silence on purpose. And he sat in it alone. And he was willing to walk out of that room a fraud in everyone's eyes, rather than break his word to people who would never even know he'd done it. I've told a lot of these stories on this channel. This is the one I keep coming back to, and I'll tell you honestly why. It's not because of Cole. It's because of Raymond. Because most of us are not the man with the secret kindness. Most of us are the man with the old wound, walking into rooms checking every kind face for the knife, so sure we're being wise when we're really just being afraid. And the bravest thing in this whole story isn't the silence. It's a 57-year-old man walking back to a microphone to say, in front of everyone, I was wrong. And here is exactly why. I don't know if I could do that. I'd like to think I could. But it's a lot easier to stay vindicated than to walk back and undo it. And most of us, most of the time, stay vindicated. And maybe that's the thing I keep turning over. This story is fictional, inspired by the kind of person we'd all like to believe is out there. The one who would rather be thought a fraud than break a promise to someone who'd never even know. If something in it landed for you, drop a comment and tell me what you took from it. I read them, and the quiet ones say the most. If you know someone who's been checking every kind face for a knife for a long, long time, share it with them. It might be the thing they needed to hear tonight. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. There's another one coming, and I think you'll want to be here for it. See you in the next one.